Yeah, this is my 32nd year in journalism, full-time journalism. And I've had, my career essentially has been examining this question that now on the blog, .earth, my blog at the New York Times, which I was doing even when I was a news reporter, revolves around a question. In the old days, as a reporter, you had a beat. Your beat was the environment or the stock market or the Yankees or the media. My beat for many years has been the question, which is how do we come of age on a planet? How do we head toward roughly 9 billion people with the fewest regrets? That's my daily question. And I think you'll see more and more journalism in this century will revolve around questions instead of beats. Beats are way too constrained when you know that all the issues that matter are multidisciplinary. You're not a sports reporter. Well, maybe sports. Maybe the Final Four is kind of just a beat. But most things that are consequential beyond the realm of sports have all these interlaced elements that make it hard to compartmentalize that way. And it's true in academia, too, which is why this center is so valuable. At Pace University, right now, we're just merging our environmental science and environmental studies departments for the first time into a single entity under a new head. So that's kind of an exciting reflection of that reality. So I've gotten into trouble by using the word good in describing this age of us, AKA the Anthropocene, as the British call it, the Anthropocene, as we sort of call it. And basically, probably fewer than 1% of Americans or people worldwide even have heard the term. So those of us who are paying attention to this question are a very small part of the global landscape of ideas. But I do think that there's a way to have a good path in a tough time. And I think you heard a lot of that, a lot of that from Susie Moser earlier in a different way than what I'll describe, but the same idea that, here we are. Trajectories are in worrisome directions. You could use whatever adjective you want for that. And we don't know how to get there from here. So when you're in a situation like that, you can either throw up your hands or you can get engaged. And I think I'm going to try to illustrate ways we can engage. But even in using the word good, I've gotten punished a little bit. Clive Hamilton, an ethicist in Australia, I don't know if he's spoken here before, he wrote a piece that kind of trashed the whole idea that you could, that anyone who says there's a good path in the Anthropocene is fantastical, just not really reality-based. And I've tried to think of myself as a journalist as being extremely reality-based as much as I can in a complicated landscape. So we've had some differences. And then when I gave a talk about this and Clive published his paper about critiquing me and other people referencing things that way, my friend Betsy Colbert put up this tweet. 2 words that probably should not be used in sequence, good and Anthropocene. Very smart essay by Clive. So Twitter, we've been engaging on Twitter, and I kind of said on Twitter, I think my response was, well, I don't think you guys are for a bad Anthropocene, are you? So what do you do? What do you do? So my question is, what do you do? And the curves, you look at the curves of us, whether it's the recent planetary boundaries, the Stockholm resilience work, the great acceleration. We basically are in Zoom mode. We've been in Zoom mode for a number of generations, since the 1800s, since the Industrial Revolution, as you've heard several times referenced here. This is the curve of us. And to reflect on and kind of give you my argument for a way forward that's optimistic and constructive, I'm going to go back into my own curve of where I am on the curve of us. And if you go to populationaction.org, that website, there's a little widget there. You plug in your birth date. I blogged about this a year or 2 ago. And you can find out where you are on the curve of us, literally. So that's me, March 25th, 1956. 2.794 billion of us, just that short distance ago. And again, Zoom. And we know that there's a huge demographic shift that's happening such that by mid-century, that curve will have a fundamentally different shape. And that one of the big debates is, are we going to consciously shape it, or are we just going to do what bacteria have done, and everything else does? You hit a wall, and nature enforces limits on you. That's the question. But I'm going to start my discussion in the year 1968, which for me was, I was around 12 years old, and my life was kind of good. I was in suburban Rhode Island. That's me and my brother. I loved fishing. Fishing was one of my big engagements with nature. It's what got me interested in studying biology, and like Carl Safina, I'd like to catch and eat fish. Some of my friends like Sylvia Earle don't like to go there. I think it's a good way to engage with the living world for those who want to do that. But so I had this mythology as a 12-year-old kid at that time. This was a grand time. I could walk through the woods and go fishing in a little stream not too far from my house, through the suburban kind of, through some woods outside our little development. But of course, it was a horrifically troubling time. It was the Vietnam War. It was assassinations of key people. The civil rights movement was underway. The anti-war movement. Duck and cover exercises were still reality. And The Population Bomb was the bestseller that year, 1968, that year when I was 12. Paul Ehrlich sold 2 million copies of that book about the end of us, and that curve's not going to sustain. There were many aspects of his thesis that haven't been borne out yet. Depends on who you talk to about whether he was completely wrong or not. He's an old friend of mine also, so I reserve judgment. And the other thing that characterized that age was two themes, again, drawing largely from what you see here. This was a troubling time. And they were woe is me and shame on you. Everyone was kind of angry and in everyone's face. And there were many reasons for that, the draft and the war, and there was injustice of many kinds. It was very visceral. And as a 12-year-old, I had my first sort of, especially in the environmental movement, which was just really getting into high gear at that time too. That was the meme. Woe is me. The Hudson River was full of crap, and shame on you. Increasingly, it was someone's fault, not always your own. So I'm 12 years old, and one day I'm walking through the woods, and there was a bulldozer. I wasn't present enough, and remember back then you didn't have a camera on your phone. This is a picture I got off the web. I didn't turn around and take this picture in the woods at the age of 12 of the bulldozer that was in what I considered my woods. I was righteously pissed off because they were actually, you could see they were going to start to excavate a new area for a subdivision. And wait, these were my woods. That was my field. I used to walk through to that river behind the supermarket to hang out on the mossy banks. And so I ran back in the house, and this was my first real shame on you moment. I went back in the house and I got some paper and a pen and I wrote a death threat. And I put it on the seat of the bulldozer. And I think the statute of limitations is, I feel badly about that now. It might have unnerved the guy. But it was clearly like a kid's message. So I was getting in that mode. Now, I didn't become a raging activist. I went to college. I wanted to be a marine biologist, actually. I grew up watching Jacques Cousteau on TV, and all he had to do was put a camera underwater and go, ooh la la, and I was completely taken. And in Rhode Island, I was lucky enough to be able to put on a mask. My best bar mitzvah present was a U.S. diver's snorkeling gear, which was his company. So I felt, oh my God, this is so great. But then I kind of got into college, and then as I was getting out, I realized that PhD is about studying this one thing for the rest of your life. Or at least for 5 or 10 years, which at that time felt like the rest of your life. And it wasn't me, so I tried to do some other things, and I got a fellowship to go study in the South Pacific to do a project of my own creation. And I ended up, and remember, none of this has to do with journalism yet. I had no interest. I wasn't on the school newspaper, anything like that. So I got out into the world. I'm running around trying to understand man's relationship to the sea in the South Pacific. That was my thing. But then I stumbled onto the crew of a sailboat. So I'm 22 or so, and they needed crew. This boat was heading from New Zealand, where I happened to be at that point, well, it was going around the world. They had T-shirts, "Around the World with Wanderlust." The name of the boat was Wanderlust. So who could not join the crew of that boat? So I did, and it was this trip that ended up making me want to be a journalist and not a scientist. That was me near Lake Batur in Bali. While we were on the boat, we went to all these amazing places and saw remarkable things. And we experienced life on a boat is kind of like life on a planet, a finite planet. You have this crew, and some people were thrown together who hadn't grown up together, whatever. And there was a smoker, and the skipper made him go in the dinghy off the stern of the boat to smoke his cigarettes. So it was this adaptive learning. We found ways to live with each other, even in the microcosm of a 55-foot boat in the middle of the ocean. And the ocean could be very rough, and I learned wonderful things, how to adaptively fix things in tough circumstances. That's me with the fish and the really long 1970s vintage hair. And that was the Maldives. We went through the Maldives before I was thinking about sea level rise. And then this is one of the moments that made me want to be a journalist. We crossed the Indian Ocean, and if you ever have the chance to be on a sailboat becalmed in the middle of the Indian Ocean for a number of days, I encourage you to try it, because it's one of those great ways to feel small on a planet where we feel so potent and so empowered, and there you felt small. But we got ashore in Djibouti, and I'm running around with my camera because I loved National Geographic too, and I was starting to think like maybe I should be a journalist. And at the one corner, one intersection in Djibouti, which was a very poor place, but it had a French military base, there was this pile of things. I thought they were like carpets or something. They were leopard skins. And that was my first real, that's not sustainable moment. It was like, whoa, how could there be, are there that many leopards in a 100-mile radius of here that you could do that? Of course there weren't. They must have come from further afield. They're being sold to these French Foreign Legion guys. And so it was those kinds of experiences that made me want to be a journalist and kind of figure out how this planet works. And it didn't hurt that our little boat excursion got kind of interrupted. Real life, you could keep going. The thing about the world is it's circular, it's round, you could kind of keep going. But I was at the wheel when, in a storm in Greece in the middle of the night, and we had bad navigational maps, charts, and I ran us aground on this sandbar. So that's like not a good moment. And it says, be prepared, be resilient. We got the boat off the reef, off the sandbar, and that's me working on fixing the bottom once we got it ashore, because it almost sank. And that's when I realized maybe I should actually grow up, and go back to the real world. And I went to Columbia Journalism School, graduate school, got a degree in journalism, and started in the magazine business. And one of my first articles is circulating there now. And I've been in, as I said, journalist now for 30-something years. I've been from the Amazon to the North Pole, been from the middle of the ocean to the Copenhagen climate mess. And I'm starting to understand some things beyond facts. See, facts are just the stuff that gets into a story in the New York Times is a bunch of facts or assertions or conclusions based on data. And I started to learn more about the process of journalism, the imperfections of it, how we communicate, what gets missed, and what's wrong with the world. And there was still some shame on you stuff. Like my first magazine article was an award-winning piece that turned into an investigative report on paraquat, an herbicide that in the early 80s was mainly in the headlines because it was being sprayed on marijuana fields in Mexico, and we were worried that maybe people who were smoking marijuana might be ingesting paraquat. But it turns out it was actually much more important story was that in poor places around the world, this very valuable herbicide, actually, it's a cool tool. It degrades quickly. It's not persistent in the environment. Was being terribly abused. People were spraying it the wrong way. It was being decanted into bottles that didn't have the warning label. So I wrote this big piece. And by the way, sometimes investigative reporting is not very hard. In fact, in the old days, it wasn't hard at all. When I was writing this piece, I collected information from the companies that sell paraquat, ICI, this British conglomerate. And in their own flyer, this is their own flyer, they included this picture of a guy applying paraquat in a field with bare feet, spraying it like literally in front of him as he's walking across the field. That's how oblivious we were, meaning us, society, to some of the risks, environmental risks that now we perceive as really important. And that was kind of the easy stuff. That's a good, in journalism there's the word a get. That was a really good get. Man, I really nailed them. I got this IRE award and I was on my way as a journalist. So shame on you, and then there was still plenty of woe is me. The piece that's running around is my first article on the climate system, which was on nuclear winter, not global warming. In 1985, the Cold War was still raging. The idea then, sort of like geoengineering, but not intentional. If we incinerated enough cities, the atmosphere would be full of schmutz, and it would chill the earth, and crops would fail, and ecosystems would be disrupted, and we'll be tied. And in the reporting time it took to do the article, the story started to get more nuanced. Steve Schneider, a great climate scientist and policy analyst who passed away 5 years or so ago, who I've known since then, he did an analysis that concluded it was going to be more like nuclear autumn. So where's the headline in nuclear autumn? Can you imagine if I went to like an editor at the New York Times, hey, there's a new paper coming out. If we burn all the cities in the world in a nuclear war, there'll be a nuclear autumn after it. So what that says, it taught me a lesson about how science works. New idea comes out, it's kind of stark, it's kind of, it's still rough-hewn, and then science nibbles at it. And it's an antagonistic process. That's how science works. And too often, I think we kind of gloss over in how we portray science, including science journalists gloss over, that argument is how science proceeds. So that when you see two scientists arguing about some detail of global warming, that's completely normal. And that way, I think if we had more cognizance of how science works and less worry, then you don't have to worry so much about the science facts being portrayed. Then people would realize that argument doesn't mean we don't know anything, and that's actually the process of science at work. And so that kind of got nuanced away, and of course the Cold War got nuanced away as well. But global warming has had a very different character to it. I started writing about it in 1988. I mean, the New York Times had articles about global warming going back to 1956. If you Google for 1956 global warming Revkin, you'll find that article. I've reposted it a few times. So in 1988, though, we had heat spells in the northern hemisphere. We had Yellowstone was on fire. We had Jim Hansen, who I got to know that year, testifying about the dangers that he perceived. He was ahead of the curve, ahead of the pack, and concluding that even then there was a perceptible human imprint on the climate system. And that was and I wrote that article. What's weird about that article? Well, it basically says get used to it. It had a whole bunch of stuff about cutting emissions, and it actually warned about, and I reposted this also online. I got Discover magazine to digitize it and put it online, so you can find that too. It said China is going to be growing and wanting to burn its coal. So it had some hints, some foretastes of everything that's come on since. Virtually every climate scientist I've interviewed in every story since were in this one too. And that's why I started to understand from this point forward, having covered this issue for so long, that what we perceive now as some new aspects to it were actually not new. They're just newly in the news. Now I diverged from climate a little bit. I went into the Amazon rainforest in 1989 after Chico Mendes was murdered, and spent several months down there writing The Burning Season, my first book, which was an adventure, seeing as I just took like a crash course in Portuguese and went down. But I survived, and that's me in the back of a canoe. That's how reporting in the analog era looks. It's like that is the pad and the pan and there was no Wikipedia entry on Chico Mendes, so I had to go through the forest and interview everybody I could meet. But what I learned that was the first time I really appreciated in a pretty broad way that most of our environmental challenges are also societal challenges. These are just two scenes I encountered on that reporting trip. One was a little girl who was one of something like 16 kids in her family who, the mother had 16 children, but only 10 were alive when I met them because of that was their mortality rate at that time in that part of the Amazon, 1989. And I was in Manaus, which was already a big city, and I was walking down a street, and there was a funeral parlor. They had like open air storefronts, and I saw that scene, and I had never seen that in Rhode Island growing up, coffins in all sizes as a routine thing. Now, if you've read lately, child mortality rates have been plunging. We've had an incredible success, but it's still many millions of children dying avoidably in many parts of the world every year. And so this is not a remarkable image in many parts of the world still. And that says to me that we have so much opportunity to get busy to make sure that picture becomes kind of an antiquated artifact, kind of like that magazine running around here. So that was 1990, that book came out. And then 92, I got involved with global warming again. I wrote my first book on global warming, which included a passage that got me kind of involved in this whole Anthropocene thing. A long time before it was an Anthropocene thing. I wrote this passage, perhaps Earth scientists of the future will name this new post-Holocene era for its causative element for us. We are entering an age that might someday be referred to as, say, the Anthropocene. I didn't know really like Greek roots of words, so it's okay. Paul Crutzen, the Nobel Prize winning atmospheric chemist, he can have it. He can have the glory. After all, it's a geological age of our own making. The challenge is to find a way, and see, this is like my .Earth question, but this was 1992. The challenge now is to find a way to act that will make geologists of the future look at this age as a remarkable time, a time in which a species began to take into account the long-term impact of its actions. And that's been my question ever since then, with a lot of coming and going and diversions and and stuff. And then I got into this environment, this news environment, the newspaper environment, and I learned this whole another set of norms and rules. And the pace of magazine writing is kind of leisurely. And I was racing around the Amazon doing my book, but it still was, it was a year-long thing of months of reporting, months of cogitating and writing, and it came out. This is like, zoom, zoom, zoom. There was an editor when I first started at the New York Times in 1995. He said to me one day, I was late on a 400-word story on a park meeting, and he said, "Revkin, this ain't no seed catalog." And I mean, this is seed catalog country out here, so you know what I'm talking about. And it's not a seed catalog. It's transitory. It's you got to get it done now. It's imperfect. The copy editors made it beautifully, as close to perfect as possible. And I still, once in a while, got into, the meat and mashed potatoes. The thing that makes your career in journalism is investigative work. And I did a bunch of reporting in the mid-2000s on the Bush administration, politicization of science, government science, particularly of government communication of science. And it wasn't just Jim Hanson's muzzling. There was a pattern for years at NASA of restricting press releases on climate science studies and stuff like that. And that felt good. I was doing my thing. But here I'm kind of approaching middle age at this point. And I'm starting to think, and this got 2 people had to leave the White House because of this reporting. So that kind of feels good in some ways, but it's like, do you want to make your career and your sustainability effort just doing negative, basically getting people taken away from something as opposed to building things? So I started to feel a little that the news process was insufficient. And then the worst thing happened of all. I started diving into, how many behavioral scientists are in the room? How many, sociologists or psychologists? Oh my God. You guys. So here, I spent 20 years writing about global warming as a biogeophysical kind of thing and technological thing. And then I started digging in on your realm, the behavioral sciences. I went, oh my God, information doesn't matter. It's like, for a journalist, that's kind of an existential thing. And just to start to illustrate what that meant. So here are 4, I started doing these experiments, on .Earth, and this is 2009 or something. I looked at Nobel Prize-winning physicists, people who won Nobel prizes for physics, which is how greenhouse gases work and energy flows. And so I found that you could kind of basically, if you want to go into a bar argument on global warming, you can find a Nobel Prize-winning physicist to stand by your side and help you, no matter what your vantage point is on this issue. Ivar Gaever there, he was at Rensselaer. He got his, I think, in '77, somewhere around there, when the American Physical Society came out with its statement on climate change, and it included the phrase, the words incontrovertible. That made his hair catch on fire. And he said publicly, he wrote about this, that nothing in science is incontrovertible. That's religion. He became a very prominent kind of rejecter of the climate consensus. Bert Richter is a Nobel Prize winner who's very much into nuclear power is the next thing. Steve Chu, of course, Robert Laughlin, he's the mushy middle guy. So there's one for everybody. And that says to me that, again, as an information provider, it really challenged me to think, well, is this what I want to do the rest of my career as an able typist, able creator of content or communicator? And the answer was increasingly no. And that's one of the things that led me into academia, to be effective. That usually generates a laugh line from faculty. Oh, you came to academia to be effective. Yeah, good luck with that. So, but I think there's lots of reasons to have hope. So I learned that. Culturalcognition.net is just the website for Dan Kahane's work at Yale. He's at Yale Law School. He's a behavioral scientist there. Does work that basically, you've heard many examples in recent years of if you pummel an anti-vaxxer with more studies about the safety of vaccines, it just makes that person more resistant. So information reinforces us. We choose information selectively to reinforce our silos, that kind of thing. But then I started realizing other things too. It wasn't just about that. It was about other aspects of our lives that are hard to change. It's not just about information, it's about inertia. I gave a talk a couple of years ago in New York City trying to delineate that anyone who expected that that cleaning up the information, the fights over information will magically make us race to decarbonize our economy, has a wishful view of the problem. And, I describe the problem as like a boulder in a path, and Al Gore is here trying to really push it hard up the hill. And if you want to maintain stasis, and we are basically the rock. We like fossil fuels. I flew here this morning on a plane that is not a renewable biofueled airplane. The closest thing to that right now is the natural gas fueled airplanes that Qatar Airways has now, because they have so much natural gas. So you can see paths toward a renewable, and that's just natural gas, but it could be biogas. You could see a path toward a renewable airplane fuel, but it's not what I took here, okay? And I drive a Prius, but half of its mileage comes from gasoline. I'm not rich enough to own a Tesla. That would be really cool, but they're not available. So we're stuck with our fossil fuel lifestyles still largely, and and even those who rail against them, really do embrace them on a significant level, because we can't function without fossil fuels. And so if you want to maintain stasis, you have the easiest job. You're just there with a feather duster. And this idea that there's some titanic fight underway, if you take away the Koch millions that will magically move forward, I think is kind of fictional. I can't prove that, but I'm just think about that. And then from people like Jesse Ausubel, who's a longtime sort of global trends analyst at Rockefeller University, he said this one time, a long time ago, about most energy policy, particularly, politicians are mostly pulling on disconnected levers. And what he means is, like yesterday, when the United States put out its pledge of climate action, as many environmental groups have complained, it's essentially enshrining what's already underway. It's not determining what's underway. We've had this background decarbonization of our economy going on for a long time. Efficiency, industry doesn't like to waste money. There are things that are going on. So what I try to look for as a journalist is not just, okay, the administration put out a new press release on our commitment for Paris. I look at, well, how much of that is different than what would be happening anyway? And it's usually a much, much, much smaller increment of change. China, same deal. They're moving aggressively away from coal because it's killing people and creating a political problem, and it's not about climate change for them. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's great. It's anything that moves us away from conventional use of coal is a good thing. So, but all of this led me to the blog that I started, .earth. I started when I was still a news reporter. No one kind of ordered me to. There was no mandate at the New York Times that reporters start blogs. But to me, it created a portal for me to look at this issue in a continuing way, and also to create a conversation with readers, and to reflect the complexity of it, that this is not like the pollution problems I grew up with in the 20th century. It's very, very different, as you've heard here in different ways today. And the blog, again, gets back to this. There's plenty of science, 50 years now, more of science that really points out that greenhouse gases function, that they're long-lived, we're adding them to the atmosphere way faster than nature has taken them out. And as you heard many times, the trends are toward more and more and more, because many countries in the world haven't had their fossil fuel party like we've had yet. One quick data point, just to drive that point home, is that India, the carbon tracker people, their latest numbers have our per capita CO2 emissions per year here, per person, is about it's gone down. It actually was 19 tons per person. Now it's 17. So we've had this pretty good achievement of ramping down from 20 to 19, now to 17 tons per person per year, average. India is up to 1.9 tons per person per year. So, and there's a little chunk of India that's much like us, the rich people in the cities. But when you aggregate across India, it's 1.9 tons per person per year. And that's when I see John Kerry or someone sort of trying to press India to come up with your concrete commitment before Paris. I wouldn't expect anything anytime soon. They are under-energized, and I've talked to many, many politicians there, and actually just citizens who said, we need energy more than we need to worry about climate change. That's your responsibility. Big chunk of the gases that are already up there were from us. So we're in this kind of deadlocky situation. And again, the blog gives me a way to sort of keep addressing all the different facets of this question in a running way. And not just climate, as I'm sure you've seen if you've looked at .earth. So it's potency and self-awareness. And just to be sure people understand we're in a race. But it's not a two-way race, it's a three-way race. It's our recognition, our environmental potency, and our awareness of that, but also our awareness of our own inner limitations. And this is all the research that the behavioral people are doing. That's another form of revelation that's come in recent years that wasn't there a number of years ago. We're getting a much clearer picture of the kinds of biases we have, the kinds of misperceptions of risk that we have. And then the reality is that there's no us. There's at least two big us's in the world right now, the have-nots and the haves. And you can kind of subdivide that into the sort of havings, the Chinas, the BRIC countries. But that reality means there's no simple fix. And this came up earlier from Susie as well. And I'm going to conclude, but I'll hint at it now, that what we kind of have to figure out, especially those who are deeply concerned about this, you don't want to flame out. This is not, the message in 2001 and 2009 leading up to Copenhagen was seal the deal, as if that one magical moment in Copenhagen was going to solve our problem for us. But the scope and complexity of this problem is such that we need to have a mix of urgency and patience. And to me, that translates into sustained engagement. When you put those two words together, like good Anthropocene, I think what you come away with is engagement, sustained engagement. Now, the other thing I've kind of learned through this 30-year process of examining these tough issues is that it might suit us, and this relates a little bit to what you just heard about water policy, water best management practices, moving away from numerical goals to sort of process kind of goals. Too long we've been stuck on numbers, and there are numbers that have a lot of resonance. I have been hammered by Joe Rahm and others for rejecting the idea that I need to choose a number. I mean, to me, I look at the complexity, the trends, and I say, I have not yet met anyone, and I've interviewed virtually everyone in this arena, who can tell me how to reach these numbers with the information that we know now. The behavioral information, the social information, the demographic information, the technological information, the political information. There's no way we know of now, today, to get to these numbers. I mean, you can come up with lots of thought experiments, but there's a difference between a thought experiment and an actual roadmap. So when you're in a situation like that, again, as I said earlier, you can just sort of throw up your hands and say, well, screw it. Or you can find things to work on that can start to bend those curves in the direction toward that you feel you want to go in. And just to give you, I'm only going to give you one data point to sort of make my point about we don't know how to get there. Because everyone talks about Germany. Oh, Germany, they're doing great. And they put so much money and effort into expanding their renewable portfolio, especially solar. But the Heinrich Boll Foundation, which is a very green foundation, did this study called the German Coal Conundrum, where essentially what they're doing is challenging Germany to get more and more aggressive on moving away from fossil fuels. And so you think about all that renewable expansion that happened there, but this is what it actually looks like. So this is the only real wonky graph I'll show, but it's worth showing. So this is since reunification, since modern Germany. This is their entire primary energy landscape. So this is oil for transportation, it's coal and lignite, brown coal for electricity, natural gas. I'm just going to run over there for a second. So here, what you can see over there, lignite, hard coal, natural gas, oil, others, nuclear, and then renewables. So what did renewables do? All that renewable expansion, all it's done is taken away, it's compensated for the lost nuclear capacity as they start to shut down their nuclear fleet. It's barely nudged the fossil imprint of Germany. So that says to me, if that's Germany, and they've been working so hard at this for so long with their energy wind program and everything, then that says, again, we don't know how to get there yet. We know some things, but we don't know how to get to those grand numbers. So this gets me back to, well, if you don't know how to get there, what do you do? And I say you focus on traits. This is very much a mirror of what you heard a minute ago in terms of water policy, but more broadly. What are the characteristics you would want in a society and in individuals that give you the best shot of surprising yourself on the upside? And there are things that you can do. And this gets back to David was talking about my tweets in 2013. I can't remember what stimulated this, but I just one day said, I'm just going to do a string of tweets that lay out a certain architecture for how you could move forward in a complex, wicked environment. And it's basically a bunch of words. You can come up with your own words. but I'm a songwriter, so it kind of felt like a song. I haven't written a song about this yet. But it's strategy for sustainable human progress: bend, stretch, reach, teach, reveal, reflect, rejoice, repeat. I'll elaborate. And then I did a tweet for each one of those. And here's what I mean. I kind of amplified on them here. So bend, the most familiar version of bend is resilience, is a very overused word. And I've seen many architects come up with beautiful renderings for what New York City could look like in a world in a design that's much more able to absorb surges from storms like Sandy and still operate as a center of commerce and a dense, urban, rich place. And there's lots of versions of this. But then what happens is you get into the politics of it and you realize, how do you make that happen in the world we know? Mayor Bloomberg, when he was leaving office, his last global warming speech was very creditable in many ways, but it had this whole section that was the "we will not retreat" section. That even with sea level rise, we're going to save those low-lying parts of Brooklyn, and I guess Williamsburg is so hip now, we can't possibly have it go away. So, and I wrote a piece about him at the time, and what I said was and I kind of criticized the mayor, but at the same time I said, suppose you're the press secretary to the mayor of a coastal city facing rising seas, and your mayor says to you, okay, I want you to draft me up a speech that says, we will retreat. But but make it work politically. Can you imagine, think about that task, if you're sitting there going, okay, we will retreat smartly, we will carefully retreat, we will withdraw. No, that doesn't work. It's the politics of this that isn't there. So finding that is a really big opportunity. Finding ways to have our politics facilitate bendy, softer approaches to development is a really good thing. I'm not quite sure how to do it, but we need to do that. Bend is also about personal bending, personal resilience. Billy Parrish is one of my favorite characters in this great saga of the climate and energy challenge. I first met him in 2005 at the climate conference, the COP conference in Montreal. And he was a barefoot guy in the hallways, one of those sort of, energy action. And he did that for a while, and he realized, maybe he couldn't do that forever. And then he went on to, now he co-founded this solar financing company in the Bay Area that has found a way for small investors with a few $100 to set aside in an interest-bearing account, essentially, who can provide the capitals for a nonprofit group, for example, that wants to install solar panels on its roof but doesn't have the upfront cash. So it's a financing mechanism that's really brilliant. It's facing all kinds of administrative, sort of regulatory challenges. But I love his adaptability and pursuit of his goal, which is energy wisdom and energy progress, sustainable energy. And I don't mean that everyone needs to grow up and wear suits and stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. There's a role for everybody in this. Some people could go the other way. But having that sort of plasticity is your friend, I think. And bend is also about getting comfortable with differences, that there are people in this world who will take fundamentally different approaches to pursuing progress on a finite planet. There are scientists like Susan Solomon in 2007 leading the IPCC science report rollout, who when a BBC reporter kind of badgered her to get her to say what she felt about the science, she kind of just crossed her arms and said, no, that's not my job. My job is to put out the science. You guys, society's job is to feel, respond. So she was very much not an activist scientist. And then you have Jim Hansen, of course, who's at the same time starting to get really aggressive. And I think when they tried to muzzle him, it just made him more empowered. And getting arrested and chaining to fences and stuff. And there's room in this landscape for scientists of all sorts. There's no right or wrong. And in terms of on the same front, you have technological responders and you have activist responders. It's all part of the picture of how a diverse society confronts challenges, especially in a democracy. It's inevitable. And I was thinking about this a lot, and I started to sift the internet to see if scholarship had kind of looked at this. Does diverse responses to environmental challenges, is that adaptive? Is that kind of good? I still don't know the answer to that question. I think it is. And so as I was searching, there was this ecological analysis. I haven't interviewed Elmquist yet. I'm not sure if, who's here from there? Maybe she might know him. He did this paper in 2003 response diversity, ecosystem change, and resilience. So this is a biological response to environmental challenges. What he says is the more diversity of, it's not diversity of species, it's not like the number of species, it's diversity in responses to an environmental challenge that gives you adaptability. And so when I saw this, I just read this paper, and I started, I retyped it a little bit, and I did this just as like a thought experiment. I don't know if it works. So the diversity of responses to environmental change among people contributing to the same social function is critical to resilience. Response diversity is particularly important for ecosystem and social renewal. And I think there's something there. I've talked to Robert Brule at Drexel and others, and he's pulling together some papers that are somewhat related to this. I should talk to Susie and others too. But I just think about this. It just says diversity is your friend. And too often in the environmental movement, we've been, it has to be my way or the highway. It's either Keystone or you're an a-hole. And that has led to divisions. Nuclear power, look at these two guys. My friend Bill McKibben and George Monbiot, who's kind of the Bill McKibben of UK. After Fukushima happened, this epic, catastrophic failure of a Japanese nuclear power plant, within a day or so, they had both written columns for The Guardian that were diametrically opposed in their reaction to what had happened. McKibben, as you would imagine, wrote that this shows you that nuclear power is too brittle. We need to use renewables. We have to end the nuclear age. And George wrote a column that said this was a crappy plant. It had every reason to fail completely and melt down in horrific ways, and it didn't under a 9.0 earthquake and a tsunami. Therefore, this shows you that we need to pursue the next generation of nuclear power. Nuclear power is more essential than ever. Wow. So that, when I saw those two, I wrote a piece on .earth just kind of showing people, look at these. Neither one is right or wrong, depending on your view. They're different. And can we find an environmentalism that can incorporate those differences? I'm not sure that's possible yet, but I think it's important to consider. Stretch is innovation, of course. I've seen wonderful examples. This is Ben Gulak, who I wrote about, 6 or 7 years ago. He was a freshman at MIT. And before he was at MIT, his family went to China on a vacation. He saw the traffic and pollution. He said, I'm going to invent an electric motorcycle. And now he comes from a family of mechanical engineers and stuff, and his grandfather had a shop that he inherited or something like that. Anyway, so he started building these prototypes. It has a gyroscope. There are actually two wheels side by side. It's really cool and weird. And by the way, 9 billion people riding around on electric motorcycles is not going to save the planet. But what I liked was he went to China, he saw a problem, he came back and started working on it. The problem is, in this country, and not just in this country, but globally, we are so unengaged in facilitating investing in this kind of potential in young people. It's really woeful. Woe is me, and shame on us. This is a curve I show. This is like one of my, it's like a visual mantra for me. This is basically a half century, now 60 years of scientific investment by the United States. Taxpayer money going into basic science. This is not technology advanced. This is just basic science. And you can see here a few features. Sputnik was over here. That was our, before the phrase OMG was out there, that was our OMG moment, existential moment. And so the yellow curve is the space race. And we really cared, that we wanted to get to the moon, as you saw earlier. It got up to about $30 billion a year in constant dollars, inflation-adjusted dollars. That was a space race. The thing that got us to the moon in 10 years was that level of investment in basic science, along with a lot of other stuff. That's just the basic science. For the most part, we had things that we needed. The blue stuff is the war on cancer. Now, the war on cancer hasn't really worked, but it's a proxy for what we care about. And we started to care more and more from Nixon on, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, and that got up to about 30 or 40. Now it's $40 billion a year, and now it's declining a little bit. So that, again, 40 billion, there's something about 40 billion that's kind of like a number. That means we care about something. And then, just to sort of put this all in perspective, the green is energy. See that little ribbon of green? Those in the back of the room, it looks like this little sort of anaconda that swallowed a tennis ball. The tennis ball was the oil crisis in the 70s. So that was that one moment when we cared about energy, was when we had those long lines of cars at gas stations. And And we invested it, well, it was like maybe $10 billion a year for just a few years, and then that went away. And do you see any kind of Republican or Democratic trend in that curve going forward? You know, everyone says Reagan unplugged that, but no one plugged it back in. It was a bipartisan slumber party on energy science in this country. And by the way, that ribbon is all energy science. That's getting more oil out of the ground. That's fracking, the research that facilitated the innovations that are now, the shale revolution is in there. A chunk of our nuclear research is in there, and everything else. Renewables is like this tiny, tiny, tiny ribbon within that. So that says to me, and you can see Obama kind of, the stimulus package is that little tiny blip at the right-hand side. Remember the green jobs thing? That's it. That's gone. And anyone who, the scientists, the sort of historians of innovation say, you know, you don't create a culture of energy innovators unless you have a sustained investment in that kind of stuff. Just to put this in perspective, this is when everything you see in this graph, all that stuff, health, space, energy, it's the red part of this graph. The gray is the Defense Department science. And that's not buying tanks. That's basic science, DARPA, you know, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency and stuff like that. And we care, all it says is we care about defense, and we clearly do. So that got up to, well, close to 80 billion a year. So until I see a culture in this country build that says, and this includes environmentalists, and most environmentalists resist the idea that research matters, but over and over, when you look at those curves, and you look at things that we care about, you realize there's this, we're just completely off the reservation on this one. So that's bend, stretch, reach. So reach is, reach is connectivity, and this is my realm, you know, communication. I think there's so many things we can do with communication tools that we're just now getting going on that could be invaluable, that could really get the right idea to the right place at the right time, but more than that, can start to shape ideas in ways that individuals can't do. So it's not just I have a bright idea and it goes to Botswana. It's that someone in Botswana has a part of an idea and someone in Italy has another part of an idea, and they get together. And we're seeing this happen more and more. The connectivity that's exploding globally is your friend. Information transparency is your friend. I think we're in a good space to see really important things happen. And this is not, you know, the too much information aspect of communication is a separate thing. This is connectivity. This is just one example in India where farmers are facilitating the outreach that you do through extension services by having farmer videotape a little explanatory thing in the local language that other farmers can understand, and it's seen by the farmers in their local internet hotspot or whatever. And so you're sharing ideas peer-to-peer between farmers using YouTube in a way that is greatly amplifies the power of an extension service. The hashtag, there's one for this conference, of course. You know, it's not going to save the world, but it is. This was an invention. That's what's kind of interesting. You can invent things now that can be transformative and don't actually require materials. The hashtag was invented by Chris Messina, who I've met before. He was at Mozilla, the company that did Firefox. And one day in 2007, way back in 2007, he said, hey, this is kind of in the programming community. He said, hey, how do you feel about using pound for groups? Pound like with a phrase, as in pound bar camp message. And that little message started this norm of doing this, such that now you have these, well, I'll show you. You have all this noise out there. Twitter is just a subset of all the noise we're surrounded with. And it's mostly about Justin Bieber or Kardashians or I still don't know. Can someone explain the Kardashians to me, please? I just don't get it. I don't understand. But so there's a lot of noise, but they allow you to cut through the noise and have a cogent conversation in this space, this cyberspace, and connect people who have a similar mission. And here are just a few of them. That's the one for today's meeting. That's the one for my students' documentary we're doing on coral reef conservation. Ag Chat is a really valuable conversation happening about innovations in agriculture. Environmental education, web journalism, WJ Chat, every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Wait, is today Wednesday? Yeah, so tonight you can have a live chat with anyone who's interested in communicating online. You should get online around 8 p.m. tonight, Eastern time. And you can have a series of questions are promulgated, and people have discussions about the new app for doing a better infographic or that kind of thing. It's kind of really cool. Bird class is a fantastic one, but I'm going to run out of time, so I don't. And then just to give you a couple of quick examples, I know this is probably going to run a little long. I hope that's okay. Facebook, oh my God, Facebook is mostly just, well, you know what it is. People feeling good about each other or bad about each other. Patting each other on the back. But then this kid, Isaac Fresha, he was an undergrad in Halifax, Nova Scotia at an art school. And as part of an assignment, he created a piece of art that went viral on Facebook. And it looks from the outside, it kind of looks like a conversation like you would see on Facebook. But for those in the back of the room who don't want to read the eye chart, it's basically a bunch of endangered species having a chat. And the tiger starts totally screwed, like 3,200 of me left, sad face. And then Panda, likes this. And but then Panda quickly realizes that could be misinterpreted. And he says, well, I don't mean like good. I mean like I feel you, bro. I'm around 2,500 now. And Marine Turtle chimes in, and Rhino's doubtful. And then there's kind of some trolling kind of stuff. And Polar Bear says, Elephant says, if only there was a certain someone that could help. Polar Bear says, ooh, called out. And Human says, point taken, guys. So, and this was all created on Photoshop or something. And it went around, it was reposted thousands and thousands of times. It was linked to a World Wildlife Fund Endangered Species website. And this was done by an undergraduate student in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And so that tells me you can actually have impact more and more using these devices and techniques and tools in ways that were just inconceivable a few years ago. And that gets me to the bend, stretch, reach, teach. Teach is, a realm that I'm in now, a lot of you are in. And there's so many opportunities for... This is a familiar thing. So that's that bridge building thing that probably more than a few of you did when you were kids at some point. But that was my wife and her science teacher, middle school science teacher partner, came up with the innovation of making it into a cost-benefit exercise. The kids had to buy their wood with fantasy money, and they were judged on price and performance. So it was kind of like the real world. They were learning how the real world works at an early age, and and their engagement, of course, was incredible. The one thing, if I could have one thing happen that I think could be helpful in the educational arena, it would be amplifying what this is. This was I gave a talk a couple of years ago about, and I mentioned one day, I said, wouldn't it be cool if if every school had a field trip, not on a bus to a museum or something, but a field trip to the boiler room in the school. And I tweeted about it, or I wrote something on .earth about it, and then I got this email from a woman in New York City who works for Solar One, which is a nonprofit group that does curriculum elements on energy. And she said, well, we're doing that. And this is a public school in the Bronx High School of Technology and Energy, where the kids in the school go to the boiler room, and for a day, for an hour or two, the janitor, the custodian, not janitor, is their teacher. And it was so powerful. I went on this, so they said, you should come on one. And I have video I've shot too. I just haven't had time to do anything with it. I think it's a great model for how to think creatively in the educational space. It's systems thinking. Basically, we go to school to learn. We don't go to school and think, well, where is this heat coming from, and how much does it cost, and can we do something to make the cost less, and can we do something to make our greenhouse gas emissions less? There's plenty of those things going on, probably even here, but this particular model I thought was just fantastic. And I keep thinking, like I was at a meeting of AAAS, the Science Association, a few years ago, and there was a session on what science teachers need. And one thing that came up was they need little 1-minute videos. They don't need 5-hour years of living dangerously series. They need what's a greenhouse gas? And then the teacher just shows that and then does a lecture. And I thought, well, gosh, we should create a portal for that so students at Pace and elsewhere can make those videos. And then I learned about this guy, Paul Anderson. He's at Bozeman High School in Montana, and he has created his own successful YouTube business creating these little explanatory videos. Paul Anderson, S-E-N, you should search for him, or just, it's Bozeman Science, I think. Check out his little videos and pass them around. And you can see that he's a busy science teacher who's actually filling that gap himself. He's creating the content to help other teachers do their thing. And at Pace, we've done since I've been at Pace now 5 years, We've created courses that are more practical, where we're doing stuff, sort of like that student in Halifax. We just got back from Curacao in the Caribbean. We're doing a film about the future of coral reefs in the Caribbean, and Curacao has some interesting experiments underway. There are divers there who are now going around shooting all the lionfish, the invasive lionfish, which is really a marginal thing. But they're planting, that's a kind of coral that died off terribly across the Caribbean. It's elkhorn coral. And that's a coral that was grown from the larva in an aquarium and is now being transplanted on the reef. That's a 3-year-old coral that was like this big. So they're actually trying to reseed, repopulate areas there with corals that are done that way. So in May, we're going to have the premiere of our film. It's the 5th one in 5 years that we've done on different sustainable resource management issues. The films go on the New York Times website. The students get great sort of, a talking point for their interviews. And they're entering into the global discourse on sustainability. It's kind of great. I'm going to try to speed through this because it's the end of a long day. Reveal is transparency, and everything from Snowden to Greenpeace prompting. Greenpeace did a very clever YouTube campaign a few years ago to prompt better palm oil practices from Nestle. And there's many, many other examples of this where exposing the chain from our consumer goods that we don't think about to where they come from is something that's doable more and more. I've written about a variety of examples on .earth. Then there's this, Greg Asner, who was doing, from Carnegie Institution and Stanford, he's doing these aerial surveys for all kinds of things in the Amazon. But he also put a GoPro camera on his airplane, and that had more impact than the data had by far. This created a real brouhaha. This is the gold mining areas in Peru, and it's kind of prompted the government to realize, oh my God, we got to get a handle on what's going on with gold mining there, especially from the mid-2000s onward. Gold prices spiked, and it's created a horrific scene. But if he hadn't thought to put the GoPro camera on his airplane, as well as the instrumentation doing the data collection, they would have missed an opportunity, great opportunity. Sometimes it's just the right wavelength of light. This is, I'm sure there are people in this room who are concerned about fracking. I am. I'm not against fracking, but I would like it to happen in a way that's responsible. So this is a beautiful sunny day in Colorado, and it's a conventional camera, but when you look at the same oil tank with an infrared camera, it becomes a very different scene right away. That's infrared photography, and it shows you the emissions of mostly methane, probably some other gases there. But can you imagine if you're trying to have a debate about how to cut leaks and gas emissions from oil and gas infrastructure, and you're not using the right wavelength of light? Boy, are you missing an opportunity. Showing and telling, there's so much happening with visualization. This is where the arts and sciences can get together in ways that still aren't routine, but could be. I can tell you the volume of the atmosphere. I'm not going to. It's a number of millions of cubic kilometers at sea level pressure. Adam Neiman, a science illustrator in England, shows you, and there's nothing debatable about it. It's like you could maybe debate, should it be pink? But other than that, the size is non-controversial. So that's all the air in the atmosphere at sea level pressure. And it's a great starting point for talking about a global commons issue. That's it. So 9 billion people by mid-century have to figure out how to deal with that. Bend, stretch, reach, teach. I'm forgetting my own mantra. Yeah, reveal, reflect. Reflect is, sorry, let me just go forward. Reflect is, well, science, but it's not just science. Science is the analysis of the data that Greg Asner collects. Reflect is also like, what's the role of science? What are the roles? What's the role of values? What do we do with the information we have? This is that question, can we grow up? Can we use information even when we know we process it imperfectly? And can we get the values thing in the room, but understand that there's room in the room for scientists and theologians and everybody else? And this, again, Susie was talking about this earlier. I was really lucky last year to spend 4 days at the Vatican at a very special meeting on sustainable humanity, sustainable planet, our responsibility. That was the question of the meeting. And I had my brief Pope moment. I'm over on the right there with Paul Crutzen, who's sort of behind Walter Monk. They were all like these science luminaries, and I was kind of like this. I felt like Zelig, the Woody Allen character, if you've ever seen that movie. Like, what am I doing here? But it was a great privilege to be there. And the phrase, you can't get an ought from an is from David Hume, a philosopher whose work I got to know through a climate scientist, Ken Caldera. And basically, science is the is, it's data, and the ought is us. It's like back to what I said about Susan Solomon. What do you do about something is a values-laden question. How dangerous is global warming depends on many, many different things related to your upbringing, where you are on the planet, so many other things. So getting comfortable with that reality is important. And finally, rejoice is like leaving room in this, this very gloomy landscape for reconnecting with nature, understanding that what our children will experience will be fundamentally different than our experience. Sometimes too often, I think I tend to have a nostalgic view of change, that if we could just freeze things the way they were for us, that will be the thing that our children will want. We don't really know what our children will want. Shifting baselines of perception are a normal part of this landscape as well. But making sure people stay exposed to nature is a really important thing. This was like the classic way to do that is to go to a park. We were in Redwood, one of the Redwood parks years ago. That's my son, who's now 17, but he's obviously not 17 there. And but rejoice is also relates to the urban landscapes that you heard about earlier. There's ways to have wonderful, rich experiences in urban landscapes. I was in Beijing for a meeting, and I just wandered off the beaten path one day, and I shot this video in a fitness park. I'd like to see that in more American parks, actually. It shows you that you can build into even the most dense landscapes viable, humane environments. And then the hardest thing of all, I think, the hardest thing in this whole regimen is repeat. It gets back to what you heard about adaptive management. Historically, best management practices was, like I said earlier, like 2 degrees, 350 was a number. And numbers take us off the hook. I've seen many examples, I've written about them on .earth, where a number makes you relax, because if you hit the number, then you're done. Where if best management practices is a culture, then you're never done. And it's a normalized thing. I think the more we normalize our relationship with the climate and energy challenges we face, the better off we'll be, which means that's that urgency and patience thing. It means putting away that sort of, maybe not utilizing those woe is me, shame on you eyeglasses as much as we have in looking at this issue. And so repeating, it's discipline. And like the best thing about Stuart Brand's book, that recent book, was the title, Whole Earth Discipline. We need to find a way to discipline ourselves and know that we're never done. Build a new relationship with energy, build a new relationship with the climate system. It's going to take time. And just to hammer that point, my friend Bill McKibben, he and I have been at this we're like these aging, he's younger than I am, but we're aging at the same rate. His least known book, I'm quite sure, is Long Distance, the book he wrote about his year of living strenuously when he learned how to do long distance skiing. When I talk to young people about Bill McKibben, and we differ on a lot of things, I say, don't look at what he says as much as look at what he does. I mean, he's a lifer. You heard the word lifer before. Get into this landscape, find your niche. It's the wicked nature of this problem means that everyone has something to do, and that's a wonderful thing. But you're never find a way to normalize that, like you would normalize working on poverty alleviation or public health, climate, energy. They're parts of what we work on in the 21st century, just like those other things. And then we can go forward with a sense of doing our best and learning and adjusting. And there are other words. The bend, stretch, reach, teach thing is just a bunch of words. There are definitely other words. Grieve is a word we have to do. I've written too many stories like this one. I had to write an obituary for a species. I never had to do that. This is the Baiji, the Yangtze River dolphin. And I may have to write another one pretty soon. The vaquita in the Baja California is poised for extinction as well. I just recently wrote about it again. That's the downward slope. And you can see that it's down to like 200 animals. And so there's lots to grieve about. There's lots to hope for, too. The Hudson River had these great fishes, the great sturgeons, that I've had fishermen I interviewed in the 90s who told me, you would see, this guy was towed for hours by a 12-foot sturgeon. You don't see them that big anymore. And we fished them all out, and now they're on the endangered species list. But in the Hudson River, just several years ago, I was on the Clearwater, my favorite boat on the planet, and I shot this video when they netted baby Atlantic sturgeon, and that's what they look a bit like. And then I was also on the river for tagging of the big ones. That's me helping to release a tagged male sturgeon. That's 7 feet, 120 pounds. That's kind of small, really. And so it says that there's plenty to work for. There's plenty left to save, and there's also plenty to sing about. So I want to conclude. I'm probably way over time. If I have time, I was going to sing you a song, because I got to sing with that guy. So the guitar is made out of mahogany, but it was... and this song is called Liberated Carbon. And it's basically a 3-minute history of fossil fuel, our fixation with fossil fuels. It took 1,000 generations for our species to rise, but gathering and hunting was no way to get by. We yearned to burn more than dung and sticks. Then someone came along and said, hey, try lighting this. He opened up the ground and showed us coal and oil. Said, come liberate some carbon, it'll make your blood boil. Liberated carbon, it'll spin your wheels. Liberated carbon, it'll nuke your meals. Liberated carbon, it'll turn your night to day. Hey, hey, come on and liberate some carbon, babe. It's the American way and the Chinese way and the human way. Now I got peat swamp fossils running my TV. BP's Black Label burns in my Humvee. We can light up the planet like a Christmas tree. They say that things are getting hot, but hey, we've got AC. Adaptation. Liberated carbon, it'll spin your wheels. Liberated carbon, it'll nuke your meals. Liberated carbon, it'll turn your night to day. Hey, hey, come on and liberate some carbon, babe. It's the American way. Pump those electrons and that gasoline. No sweat or hurry, just turn on a machine. We sent an army to the desert to keep this country free. Hey, hey, and to liberate some carbon, baby, for you and me. Liberated carbon, it'll spin your wheels. Liberated carbon, it'll nuke your meals. Liberated carbon, it'll turn your night to day. Hey, hey, come on and liberate some carbon, baby. Liberate some carbon, baby. Liberate some carbon, babe. It's the American way. Thank you.